All right. Hi, Hadil. Hi, Lima. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. Today's date is March 24th, 2013. And just before we got our conversation started regarding Syria, I just wanted to go over two quick ground rules that we have here at Vonvo. The first is that right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the recording is completed, we'll be uploading our video to the internet to our YouTube channel. Is that okay with both of you?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Great. And then on top of that, here at Vonvo, we're all about our conversations, staying both civil and valuable. We don't want there to be any personal attacks against anyone, especially if anyone comes into the room to speak. So are you guys fine with that ground rule?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, great. So let's get our conversation started. For those of the people who are inside of the room right now and those who will be watching this video in the future, would you guys just quickly, would you ladies mind just quickly giving a quick background of yourself and why you're so passionate about this topic? Lima, you can go first, and then Hadil, you can go afterwards.
Okay, hi, my name is Lema Safadi, and I'm a college student. I'm a sophomore college student at Benedictine University. Major in psychology, minor in biology, and I am a Syrian activist. I'm always involved in flash mobs, protests that take place in Chicago, petitions that go on, and I'm very passionate because this is my home country, Damascus, Syria, and it's been an ongoing war for 2 full years, and it's sad to see that I'm not able to go back right now.
Great. And Hadil?
My name is Hadil. I work for a newspaper called The National based in Abu Dhabi. I have been covering Syria's crisis since the beginning of the revolution, March 15, 2011. And my personal interest in Syria is given my background. I'm originally from Iraq. I feel like there are very common similarities between the Iraqi Ba'ath regime and the Syrian regime. And given how things have been unfolding, it has obviously been part of kind of my role, but there's also definitely a personal connection there.
Great. And so, let's just ease our way into this. Lima, would you mind just sort of, for our viewers, giving a, quick, sort of analysis of, your perspective of what's going on currently right now inside of Syria? Can you give us your point of view when it comes to this crisis?
Well, right now, currently, what's going on is Syrians don't have any say in the government. They're not allowed to say anything, and if they do, it's either you're killed, you're raped, or you're taken into prison and tortured in prison. And basically, what's going on right now is since people don't have a right to do anything, they're moving out and going to different places, either going to different countries in the Middle East like Lebanon or Turkey or Egypt or even America. And for the ones that are not able to leave the country, they're staying there but going to refugee camps. So it's getting very bad to this point. And almost actually very often what happens is bombs go off in places in Syria, so people die there. And it's an ongoing war that hasn't really been properly assessed yet, basically.
Great. And Hadil, can you give us your take, and if you have anything, based off of what Lima had to say, simply.
I think the economic impact of the sanctions regime on Syria has actually impacted the people that are not supposed to be affected by these sanctions. So the European and international sanctions have actually impacted the value of the Syrian pound. It's prevented trade, but I'm not talking about like trade of luxury items, but even things like food has become very difficult to secure. People's livelihood overnight people are struggling to make dues, and they are more and more reliant on family and close ties abroad to send them money so that they can, have bread and, just have a decent below standard living. And it's very sad to see this because, this is like Iraq 2.0. During the 1990s, you had the sanctions against the Iraqi people affected the people the most. Here, even, you see people that are, there are sanctions. The banks are actually closing bank accounts of Syrian nationals, but they're only closing the bank accounts of people that make below 100,000 dirhams, which is the equivalent of, let's say, $40,000.
Lima, do you hear?
There's a year.
Yeah, there it is.
People are not necessarily going to be as associated with Bashar al-Assad's regime, and yet the people who actually do have the money are the ones that are actually. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We hear most of what is coming out. Just towards the end, it started to get choppy. Lima, did you have any do you have any insight into what some of the items that Hadil's talking about, and what you can share with us regarding those items?
Can you please repeat that again?
In terms of the economic conditions, do you have any thoughts to contribute to what Hadil was just discussing? Anything to add? Or
so I was saying that the sanctions.
Go ahead, Hadi.
Hadil, are you there? Go ahead.
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah, you were just saying about sanctions because you want to just.
Yes, I'm here. So yeah, so the currency has lost more than 25% its value overnight. Sorry, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
That's okay.
Oh no, I'm actually not talking.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay.
So let me just speak about the economy if you want me to touch base on that.
Go ahead, Lima.
So Syrian economy right now is currently very, very bad. So what's going on is they to kind of like break down, like avoid people protesting, anti-Bashar. They're making food more expensive, bread very expensive, eggs expensive, just basic grocery needs for people. It's very expensive that people can't even afford it anymore. And why they're doing that is just to have people not to avoid protesting or being anti Bashar or wanting freedom and all that. So that right there is contributing to people leaving the country as well as the economy going very, very bad.
Right. Hadil, did you?
You have a number of businesses that have shut down. A lot of the banks have been noticing that them onto defaults from loans have shut down. I know a Syrian family who had a cotton factory in Aleppo, and for months it was on a standstill. There was no work to be done, and for a period of time they actually had to pay the Free Syrian Army to protect factory. In the end, the factory blew up in flames, along with 10 tons of cotton. This is just one story of obviously this means that more people are not working. I mean, right now the priority is just to stay alive. And if you have a job that you earn a decent amount and trying to support them, yeah. Although it's very, very the situation is horrible actually.
Yeah.
Right. So Lima, I mean, how does anyone even work right now? I mean, because that's something that no one's really brought up on Vonvo. Is there
Yeah.
is everyone basically out of commission? I mean, how can you even work inside a country that has this sort of civil war going on?
I agree. Like, for example, my aunt's husband, he's a dentist, and he, when he goes to work, he goes like 3 times a week. Usually, he would go, 5 times a week at least, and now he can't do that because it's very dangerous to leave the house. So he would have to go in the morning and come back when there's sun outside, not go back in the nighttime because that's when most of the accidents occur in Syria because and so that worries most people. So then from there that's where not so much money they're not getting income from that because they have to come back when the sun's out and basically that's many Syrians are suffering with that because I mean the economy is not accelerating, it's declining.
Right. Hadil, are you there? Do you hear me?
It's worth noting that the Arab Spring revolutions really happened in the Arab world because, yeah, I'm here. I'm saying it's worth noting that the Arab Spring revolutions ignited in Tunisia and just kind of spread all the way to Syria was a result, the major reason was because of inflation and because of the high cost of living and because there was really no job opportunities. And if anything, today the situation is more dire. If you look at Egypt, if you look at Libya, if you look at Tunisia, there, even after a year of securing a new government, and that's, in Syria, you have Bashar al-Assad. There is a conflict that's happening, but these are the main reasons. And if anything, they've actually worsened. The situation on the ground is very dire.
Right. Lima, did you have anything to add on top of that?
Actually, not really.
Okay. So what I was going to say is, I mean, what really, what's your guys' stance on the media coverage of Syria? I mean, like you guys are talking about economic conditions, which I really don't feel like gets covered very often. I mean, can you guys give us sort of a sense of where the whole media stands? Whoa.
Bless you.
Thank you. Can you give us your stance on the media coverage? And I guess Hadil, if you want to go first because you're a journalist, can you give us your take on how the media covers this story?
I think in general, in the beginning, especially from the Middle East perspective, when the revolutions happened and when it hit Syria, it was a very tricky situation because a lot of Arab regimes were supportive of Syria. And, just kind of talking about Syria of fallout meant that those regimes were actually in support of Bashar al-Assad leaving his seat of power. So it has been a touchy subject. Now, depending on who you're really looking at, I mean, if we look at, for example, the Saudi and the Qatari media, Saudi and Qatar have been very staunch allies of with Turkey, and they've been staunch allies of rebel regimes. So other media agencies, whether you're looking in Iraq, whether you're looking in Iran, or even Syria, internally, it's like they're completely oblivious to what is happening. And usually, whenever there are attacks by rebel groups, then they're always kind of labeled terrorist attacks. They very difficultly cover this war because it has to do with, it's very journalists on the ground. So a lot of the reporting, places like Lebanon from Dubai, to kind of get an insight, and people kind of rely on citizen journalists. To a certain extent, you can't quantify what's happening. And at the same time, some of the media agencies have their own personal interests at stake, whether they represent certain regimes that would like to see Bashar al-Assad leave. And that has an impact in the way it is reported.
Go ahead, Lima.
Okay, so I feel like after 2 years of the war in Syria, I feel like that right now not too much is being discussed about it. When it first began, the first year, that's when many news erupted. What's going on in Syria, and as well as here in America, like what we are doing, us as activists doing to help out country Syria. But I feel like now it's steering away, especially American channels, not really speaking about this topic of what's going on and stuff. But for Arabic networking channels like BBC, Al Jazeera, it is being spoken. I feel like now it's steering away, especially American channels or American news network. And I feel that by this happening, I feel like the war is going to keep on going on because we don't only need Middle Eastern people to know about the issue that's going on, as well as the world to know, so that way we can enhance and help out and hold hands together and help out Syria. And there are a couple of questions people are typing if you want me to answer them.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one asked, the people of Syria are tired of Assad. So of course the people of Syria are tired of Assad's brutality. Of course that's 100%. That's a fact actually. What's going on in Syria? So I do not support Assad, and of course the reason why I don't support him is because he's a dictator, and he hasn't helped us in any way at all, and he's actually allies with many other countries that are dictators as well. And for example, Syria has been very strong and had solid ties with Iran, especially at the political level, providing military aids to Assad's regime. So he has many allies, so we're not really backing anything from out of them, just helping out the Syrian army, and not the FSA, of course. So that's about it.
Right, Hadil, do you have any comments regarding the people who are submitting some posts in the text chat?
Yeah, I mean, to continue from what you were saying, Dima, I think people were also very sick and tired of the corruption. The corruption that is in Syria, particularly the Shabiha, that are the thugs that are personally financed by Bashar al-Assad to maintain his seat of power, has made it very difficult for any kind of development, for any kind of, for young Syrians to really see a future. And that's part of the socialist legacy was brought in by Hafez al-Assad's father. However, Bashar al-Assad introduced a series of liberalization. But obviously, the corruption is so institutionalized in society that it makes it very challenging for any ambitious Syrians to really take on any real projects to try to develop the country. And that's why you find there's a number, Syrian people are minorism. And yet most people who are very powerful entrepreneurs that are Syrian are actually investing in places in the Arab world rather than in their own country, because they don't see any kind of return. They don't see a return, and at the same time, there's a lot of problems that could be associated with having your potential business partner being somebody like Rami Makhlouf, Assad's brother-in-law, or others. That means that at any day or night, they could take over your business, your property, without you having a say, because there is no rules or regulations or laws to protect ordinary Syrian citizens.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So I guess then one of the important items that tends to get brought up is the role of the Free Syrian Army, and what exactly the also the amount of people, rebels, the rebel fighters who are inside of Syria, and fighting against the regime. There's a lot of criticism that these people are from a variety of different countries that don't include Syria. And I wanted to ask you guys if you could give us your take on the rebel fighter situation, and if you actually think these people have good, a good, they're fighting for a good cause to like create a much better Syria, or if you think that these people are just more Muslim Brotherhood and radicals, who could be coming in and taking over the country. Could you guys describe? Can you guys go into that for us? Maybe Hadil, can you give us what your journalism?
I think for Syria, I mean, they were in between. Yeah, I think for Syria, they've been between a rock and a hard place, because we kind of all knew that Syria was never going to be Tunisia, it was never going to be Egypt, it was never going to be Libya. Given the Ba'ath regime, we always knew that this was going to be a very violent revolution. Yeah, so we knew that this was going to be very tough, and it was going to be a very long process. There isn't really. Sorry, I think I forgot your question. My train of thought. I'm not sure.
That's okay.
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, could you give us your take on the rebel fighter situation inside of Syria, and where these rebels are actually, where their home countries are, if they're actually Syrian born?
Yeah. Sorry. Right.
Go ahead.
Well, so the revolution in Syria was instigated originally. I think they tried to be peaceful, but there's only so much that people can take. There's only so much in terms of murders by the Syrian regime that they can be able to handle. And Syria has been, at the end of the day, there was only so much that they can do to fight. And so that's why you're seeing, unfortunately, you do see the Muslim Brotherhood. There's definitely a role that Qatar and and all of that is kind of being channeled through Kuwait, which is the financing backdoor for the rebel groups. Unfortunately, because the Syrian uprising has become so violent on both sides, it's kind of also hard to maintain the legitimacy of the Free Syrian Army, because the entire world is scrutinizing their actions and they're judging it on what the Syrian regime is doing. So it's a very tricky situation. I mean, do you sit there and you allow your children to get murdered and your family to get murdered, or do you pick up arms? But then the entire world will be like, well, this is wrong, that you should be peaceful, you should try and demand, peacefully protest and demand for a better standard of living, better improvement in rights and whatnot. But it's a very tricky situation to really look at.
Right. Lima, do you have anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, actually, I agree with Hadid about this is a very tricky situation, because we have the Syrian Free Syrian Army, and then we also have the military army, Assad's regime army. So what's happening is both. It is now considered a war, because both are fighting, for one for pro-Bashar, one for anti-Bashar. So that's even causing more destruction in Syria. in Syria, and thus we're not technically not really getting anywhere with this because it's just an ongoing war right now. But then if we look on the bright side, we do have the FSA wins the conflict. Answering for one of the questions, I believe that not officially Syria will be free because it'll kind of like be, well, we're getting there to be free, but not yet because what's happening is we need to first build our kind of like our political, stance on everything before we actually get there. But
Right. So can you kind of can you try and answer that question that Larry posted? If the FSA wins this conflict, will the new Syria be truly free or just another theocracy as in Iran? Can you guys, Lima, can you answer that? And then Hadil, you go next.
Earlier I mentioned how Syria has a very strong tie with Iran, providing military forces to Assad's regime. So I believe from that right there is going to kind of like, since they're allies, that's what's gonna kind of help out and not have Syria But I believe actually if the FSA wins that the conflict in Syria will end, but then not right away. We're still have to kind of suffer through other things, but it'll be kind of similar to Egypt, where although Mubarak did step down, but they still have to suffer with other consequences.
And Hadil, could you go into that question?
I think the rise in Islam is pretty inevitable. If the question is really about the rise of Islam, we've seen it in Egypt, we've seen it in Tunisia, we've seen it in Libya. The entire Arab world is looking inwards, and there is a definite ascent to power by Islamic political parties, militant groups that used to be that were really considered the underclass in those societies, and now they're actually rising up. And the reason why they're rising up with such firm popularity is because of the role that they have played in supporting their communities and societies in the midst of the crackdown by those regimes. So these groups have played enormous roles in financing and supporting families and whatnot. And so that, in Egypt, you see the Muslim Brotherhood, they've had a substantial role that can only be comparable to Hezbollah's legitimacy in Lebanon. In the early, in 1990s, Hezbollah played a huge role in the development of the southern part of Lebanon, and it has emerged as a very strong power. And I think that is going, that's going to be the reality of the Arab or the Arab landscape for at least the next 5 to 10 years.
Lima, did you want to add anything to follow up on that?
But real quick, Adil, you're saying that 5 to 10 years.
You guys, I need to run now. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem, Hadil. That's fine.
No, I'm saying that the Islamic landscape in the Arab world, will continue and will be present will be felt strongly for the next 5 to 10 years. I think Syria important to emerge as they're going to have one voice, and the infighting between the opposition exiles abroad, they need to be able to build a unified platform of how the country is going to move forward, what kind of policies will be put in place to ensure, number one, needs and basic rights are taken care of and protected and respected in a legal. Those are going to be very difficult. And given the lack of history in Syria, this Arab social regime has been in power for a really long time. That it's going to take a while for that culture to be able to actually kind of adopt its own, organic, grassroots policy of how it's going to run the country in the future. And that means, building their own constitution, looking at their electoral systems and combating. There's going to be a major backlash, even if the Free Syrian Army wins. There's going to be a backlash of people that supported Bashar al-Assad's regime that will try to prevent the process from moving forward. And those are all questions that are people going to look at. And that's, there's a cultural, there's a psychological element. You have the violence that is playing a role today is going to play an enormous role in the development of these youth. You have a whole generation now that have become, that have been present, during this war. What does this mean for already like a country who has experienced the most violent form of violence by the regime? How are you going to undo that legacy moving forward? That's a major question, especially for women, for women's rights, for families. How are you going to be able to remove that culture? The torture, everything from capital punishment, things that have been kind of institutionalized by the Bashar al-Assad regime are going to have to be rethunk. And how are they going to be able to move? Because at the end of the day, a country is like a person. Syria is like a person, and it's psychologically sick. Like in the same way that Iraq was in the 1990s, and is going in that that is moving in that process today. And so you're going to have to think about how you're going to heal the country and move it forward. So those are the questions that I think are going to be have to be answered if Bashar al-Assad leaves. I have to run now, but it was really lovely having this conversation with all of you. I'm sorry that the internet connection here wasn't so great, and I have all this background noise. But thank you for having me, and Lima, it was really nice meeting you. Max, it was nice meeting you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Hadil. It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
All right, great. Lima, if you want to stick around, I'm just seeing if anyone's been. I'm looking to see if anyone is posting any questions that maybe you want to answer. I guess the one thing that I would ask you, sort of lastly, is just what's your take on the idea of, the Assad regime. The one thing that they did, which was the focal point of a great Syrian country, was the fact that it was the only secular state in the Middle East. I mean, do you hold a lot of value in those claims by, let's say, pro-Assad individuals, and do you hold a lot of value in that?
Well, can you kind of touch base on that question again? Wasn't that?
We've had pro-Assad individuals come on Vonvo and talk about how, the one thing that the Assad regime did that was great was, they promoted a secular state, and if these rebels take over, the Free Syrian Army takes over, that's going to be lost. And what's your take on that matter?
Well, I feel like when the Free Syrian Army does take over, of course, there's not going to be any more. There may be pro-Bashar, people who are pro-Bashar, but most will be anti-Bashar. But I wasn't quite sure what your pro-Assad, yeah. So but real quick, what she was touching base on Hadid that I wanted to speak about real quick is she was saying that if Syria does become free, it's not going to. It still needs therapy, like anyone that needs therapy after an accident. It needs a couple of years of therapy. So we still need basic needs. We still need laws. We still need rights, and we still need to build all of that up. We need to elect the political figures and build the country. So so Syria is not going to be promised right away freedom.
Mm-hmm. Right, and what do you know about what do you know about right now currently the refugee crisis which is taking place inside of Syria?
Oh, okay. I actually have a couple of friends that did go down to Turkey and the outskirts of Syria to the refugee camps. And right now, basically, what's happening is many people in Syria who live in villages specifically have been kicked out from their homeland and are in refugee camps. Very poor, very poor area, and um, very rarely any food. Sick people who are almost on the verge of dying. Um, to be honest, like disgusting things are seen there, and what's happening right now is people from different countries are coming in to aid them. Physicians, different types of physicians actually. Young youth activists are coming in. Journalists as well, writing reports about what's going on in Syria, and they're expanding on into the country that they go back to and make others aware of. So right now, refugees, I see that currently what's going on is really about having really these people who are living the refugees are not able to go to other countries and live there because they're very they're not as well off as others who are able to go to different countries and live there. So they just have to suffer through the consequences until they have hope. They have hope in a free Syria.
Great. So, I guess what we didn't get to cover, and we kind of have a focus on doing this in most of our Vonvo discussions, is, we try to sort of focus in on a solution. And
Yeah.
so, obviously, when it comes to the Syrian crisis, the solution is quite the tricky one. But could you kind of give us
Yeah.
your take on what you'd like to see take place inside your country, and uh, can you give us your roadmap of a solution here?
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to see on take that Syria should go on into is first of all, number one is to have a Assad regime called so get rid of Bashar al-Assad, and not just him, everyone that associates with Assad and the Hizb Ba'ath party. So that's number one, because when that's done, then people have hope in that. Okay, now we're going to create a democracy in Syria. If not, then it's going to be the same thing as Egypt. What happened was, although Mubarak left, but they still had other associates, political figures associating with Mubarak. So really didn't get anything out of it because they were just doing the same exact laws and rights as the past dictator that was held there. So I that's the number one that I would like to see, and as well as economically, everyone to be stable and to be able to live a stable life, and for like having job wise, getting paid minimum amount at least, and also as well as like the actual country to be rebuilt because it's been destructive, especially Homs, one of the cities in Syria, has been torn and destructive. It's so that's what I'd like to see is Syria being rebuilt again. Of course, it's going to take very long, but have hope in it being rebuilt again, and hope not. I hope that Syria doesn't go into what Iraq or Iran had gone into, and just be free very very soon.
Great. And so Norman inside of the chat room asked a
Yeah.
few different questions. He says, "What about the rights of
Yeah.
like lesbians and gays? Are those people going to get rights? And women's rights in particular? Are these sorts of groups of people recognized? And do you think they'll be recognized under a new regime?"
Um, Well, when the new regime comes, um, I do believe that these especially the women's party will be recognized because women have stayed very strong in this Syrian war that has been going on, which started off first as a revolution and now has led into a war. Women have stayed very strong. They've aided many specifically many FSA 3 Syrian armies, helped them out, and many have went out and protested and protested out in many different cities of Syria. These women are this, are the strong women in Syria that have went out and that really do care about Syria and people, and not just the men that have gone out. So I believe these women will be, of course, recognized in Syria. And during the other group, I feel like that, like the lesbians and gay, as you said, I feel like that's more of a religion. That will be a religious like conflicting issue, because it really depends. Because I mean, Syria it has a large amount of Muslims population here, although it does have and Christians. So I feel like it will actually violate the religions that are there. So I feel like that.
Okay, great. All right, so Lima, I guess what I was going to say is ultimately Hadil had to leave a little early, and we could have covered a few other subjects, but it's more than fine. I'm seeing Norman asked, do you think would you like Israel's help? I mean, what is your, because we can kind of wrap up our discussion. You've talked about solutions. What's your take on what Middle Eastern help you'd like to see come in particular Israel?
Okay. Concerning Israel, I say no and never. I don't want Israel to come in, and I'm not only for anyone living in Syria does not want Israel to come in, because there actually is a part of there's a small portion of land, it's called Jolan, Jordan. It's the golden, I think, and it was actually Bashar sold it, or Hafez, Bashar's former president of Syria, sold it to the Israelis, and so they own a part of Syria, a small portion of Syria. So they haven't aided us in anything. So all they did was purchase the land, and it's theirs now, and they own it. So I don't believe that Israel should be aiding us. Technically, it is aiding Bashar now. Currently, he's allies with Israel, although it's not really heard and it's unknown and heard in the news. But many know that he is actually Israel is aiding Syria. For proof wise that he sold it to Israel, he did. It's called Jolan. He did sell it to Syria. It's not. Many people think it is not, but it is. It is sold. And for proof wise, I may have to actually get that.
That's okay.
Out. Yeah.
I mean, do you want to see any sort of international help, come in to try and resolve this revolution, or are you one of the people that thinks it should just take place on its own with the Syrian people?
Oh no, of course, help, yes, of course we need that. We need medical help, aid, but and we actually do have that coming in a lot of many actually, not Syrians, but many other people, physicians coming out and helping and aiding Syria. But of course, you can't really come into the Damascus, because that's where it's very bad, very bad right now. But answering your question, you said, I believe that having people come into Syria will of course help and aid Syria into relief.
Lima, are you hear me?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So yeah, what I was gonna say is, thank you so much for your time and coming on and participating in this discussion on Syria. Um, I think we covered a variety of different things, and
Yeah.
it would be great to have you back on again to discuss any other items we missed or continuous current events and new topics which arise out of this revolution, because it doesn't seem to be ending tomorrow, unfortunately. But we have a lot of people that are interested in discussing this subject, and hopefully trying
Yeah.
to bridge the gap and sort of determine what are the best scenarios and solutions to having it end quicker.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'd actually love to come on next time. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll definitely be in touch. Okay, Lima.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Have a good day.